Good afternoon. This is a policy committee meeting of the West Bend Joint School District number 1. Today is Tuesday. I've looked at my watch, May 30th. Here with fellow committee members, Dr. Chad Janez to my left, John Donaldson to my right. I'm Chris Swigert. We have Superintendent Wimmer here as well as Tim Harder. So I believe we are all good to go. So first on our agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Let's rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and we have a number of discussion items tonight, all related to various policies. And so, Superintendent Wimmer, I think you're going to walk us through these. Our first one is Policy 165.2, nepotism, with regard to board members.
The very first one there, if you take a look, we, at our last discussion, kind of wanted to split our current policy and had both board and employee kind of integrated. So you'll see where we just kind of split that apart and put some line items on it for discussion for us if there were pieces. We have the current full policy as well as some draft language. So we were talking about, are there items that we want to carry over, items that we want to do, you know, what does that look like, kind of meeting in the middle. But that was the reason for splitting those. So if the team wants to take some time to process that, or if you've got recommendations right now for consideration, we'd entertain that discussion and we can kind of put those together, or whichever direction the committee would like to take.
Sure, so maybe just kind of walking through these exhibits. There's the one with the line numbers on the left.
Correct, and what that is, that's a cut and paste. The nepotism policy / board with the line numbers 1 through 18 is our current language. Remember, we had that in place, and you can still see the original sitting there, but it had both the board, the top part was board, and the second part was, so we just put the board with the board stuff, so you can see them side by side without kind of interference of the full policy. Taking a second to kind of look at these, get together. Any initial thoughts on the comparison? No, I think we expanded in the new language. We tightened up in coordination with legal, and then we expanded on kind of what things were defined as. And again, going both ways in the consideration of language was making sure we were saying, you know, sometimes we wanted flexible language so that didn't impair something, you know, what was too tight. That was what some of the discussion was last time. And again, I think John brought it up when we were talking about, you know, the prior language was so tight that someone quit right after. So we were looking for alignment with legal, something that didn't box us in with some of the statute references that are in the other parts of the policy, but looking at that.
What I like about splitting it out is you can see it's much more focused.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that.
Yeah,
certainly like
and
that
I
part.
think everyone, in all of our conversations around it, when we landed on, you know, keeping something, there was no opposition to splitting those two concepts. In fact, you know, there weren't any questions lingering around the staff side of it when we get to that one, but I think it's just this one centered around, and there's quite a few kind of pieces that are pretty consistent. What we could do as a next step even is kind of take the two and do maybe the traditional strike through line item piece. So you can see that, because you can see the opener, some of the closing, some of the pieces, where are the exact changes. You can see in the yellow where we really added the green there. on the new, where it was for the purposes of this policy and immediate family members, we were adding that definition there, and lineal descendants. Those were some new pieces.
I think maybe taking a look at these
Mhm.
side by side as to here's what originally, I think a lot of the discussion has been around family member and how's that defined. And I think that'd be good to kind of see the evolution or what we're seeing. I know there's a state law piece, there's the part that we had in the existing school board policy, there's whatever else we would want to create.
So in the former, if you want to take it that new language, in the former, we had, it was defined as spouse, former spouse, designated partner, biological or adoptive child, parent, either biological or adoptive, in-laws, father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, sibling, aunt, uncle, guardianship relationship, and or financial dependent or codependent, e.g. sharing the same place of residence.
And so really, to me, what that looks like is we talk about, you know, the phrase related by blood or marriage. So the marriage is all the in-law stuff.
Right.
And everything else would be kind of that blood relative
Right.
circle.
Yeah, so we had cleaned up the language in the green there, that spouse, individual relative by marriage, as you were speaking of, lineal descendant, or adoption, who receives directly, indirectly more than half of his or her support from the individual, or for whom the individual receives directly or indirectly more than one half of his or her support. And then further defining what a lineal descendant was, because that might be an unfamiliar term. So it was providing definitions there.
China, quick your
Yeah,
thinking
I
about
just-
comment.
I just don't see anything about a financial dependent.
In the last one? In that one that you're looking at?
Well, so this is the old
Mhm.
one, correct? The one with line items?
Yeah, the 1 through 18.
So that's the old
our,
one.
Yep,
The new one is not split up yet, or
yep,
the
it's
one with
split up.
green is not.
Go ahead.
So it's split up between board and staff,
Yep.
and then in there, it's talking about receiving directly or indirectly. That dependency piece, it's in B.
Yeah, but that, see, this would be an individual relative by marriage, indirectly or directly. It actually doesn't include something, you know, if I'm to understand that all of that relates to a marriage relative.
No, it says lineal descent or adoption.
Lineal descent or adoption, right, so legally, so,
No, lineal descent would be a
Children.
child.
Children,
right,
grandchildren.
like a legal,
That-
so financial dependent could be someone living with you that you are residing with as a boyfriend, girlfriend for a certain number of years, and technically, you know, be considered a couple, but not on paper. So, I mean, that's where I would say financial dependent or codependent or something like that. You know, it doesn't have to be somebody by marriage specifically to.
Sure, so making
So
sure
it
we've
just
got
seems
that
like,
captured.
you know, we could have someone that's in the district that doesn't believe in marriage,
Mhm.
that's been together for 15 years, living in the same house, and they could do whatever they want as far as going around the nepotism policy,
Mhm.
you know. I mean, I know this is specific to the board, but I don't know, you know, if we're looking at if the staff one has the same thing, but I mean, the board should have it also. The board shouldn't have,
Mhm.
So you're saying the version with the green text should have beyond the marriage, lineal descent, adoption, should just have any individual, even if on.
see, the staff one does, and number 3 does say something about financial dependent or codependent, so that wouldn't, But yeah, I don't see anything in the board side, so technically, that's a loop, I guess. Or a hole.
I don't know the answer to this question, but can nepotism apply to a non-relative? Whether through marriage or through adoption, I mean.
That's generally more of a favoritism concept than a nepotism
Right,
concept.
that's kind of why I'm thinking that, I'm not sure that, you know, if I have someone living in my house who's not paying rent or something like that, I mean, I don't know that would be nepotism if I was not involved in their
Yeah, we can,
hiring. I'm just trying to clarify that, does that even fit the legal definition of nepotism?
yeah, I think what we
So how does
could,
that tie back to conflict of interest then?
yeah, I think we can take John's concept of what the part that's missing and saying, okay, how would we integrate this into that, and just, you know, have someone take another look at that and say, okay, here's a concept that we feel is missing from this policy. How would we integrate that in a manner that's not in conflict with a definition, but more in keeping with what our wishes are?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. It may not be a nepotism issue, it may be a conflict of interest issue.
Yeah. And I think we can easily label that as such, right? If there's a thing in the label where we talk about conflict of interest and put in the subsequent, you know, including nepotism kind of thing, and make sure that we broadly define that, I think we could do that there.
Well, technically nepotism is the practice of giving jobs a favorable treatment to friends and family. It doesn't, you know, specifically, I mean, I don't know legally,
Yeah.
that's just a quick search, and I would agree with that, that's how I've always understood it.
Yeah, like you said, that concept of favoritism, I
We
think I
can
could just take
identify it
that.
however we want, just because the state statutes say one thing, it doesn't mean we can't define it. We can't define it in a greater aspect of narrowing things down to protect, you know, the district from somebody looking at it as, you guys are just giving jobs to all your friends and family.
Mhm. Given that, like I said, we can explore that and integrating that. Were there any other things that stuck out? Because we'll make sure and attend to those and have someone take a look and bring it to you as a team again. Any other pieces?
So currently, we're talking about the one with the green lettering.
That was the legal one. The
That was on the-
1 through 18 is our current language. The one with the green was the legal work and kind of updated language for recommendation. So we're just trying to marry these two, making sure, you know, that we've got everything so stated.
Yeah, I don't think I have a problem adding in
Mhm.
financial dependent. I mean, sure, I think that's fine. I don't know I don't know how you could tie in, the definition of friend is pretty broad, so anybody that you're friendly with then, or, I mean, I think at some point you have to exercise good ethics and judgment. I don't know that you can capture, you know, start defining what friend, like, so when you do something with more than twice a month or something, what do you?
Yeah, I'll talk with legal around, you know, here's what we're doing. Here were some of the questions that we had to further our discussion so that they can provide some opinion for us.
So with that, and I realize, of course, the whole board needs to look at this and think about this. I mean, I think what we're kind of gravitating toward here is the language that, based on legal advice that we had received, that's captured in this version that has the green text. What we're really talking about here, and it is important, is that green text and exactly what it is and how far we want to do it. Family members or extended family members or friends or financial codependents, et cetera, which is fine. It's what I would like the committee's thoughts on, or the text that's in the black, all the other texts. Are there any questions, challenges, or problems? I like how this, I think, mirrors that, the other language that legal had recommended, I think mirrors more closely the intent of statutory language. So clearly we have to do some more work around the green text. I was just curious if there were thoughts, you know, on the committee around the other text, the text in black. like that language. I thought it focuses very, very nicely. I think if we can get that green text set,
Yeah, and I'll talk about, like we said, kind of that, from the past language to this, how do we integrate that, and prepare that as an update for people to look at and review.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that too, and I'm fine expanding on that, like as John said.
Okay. Yeah, I'll prepare that for us to take a look at, so you can see it. I think seeing it in context is always helpful.
all right, any other thoughts on this item? We'll obviously see it back at a future meeting.
Yeah, I would just say, I guess I still like the old one. I mean, it still does define other things in here that, you know, I feel like we are leaving out. I mean, yeah, at some point we're gonna be splitting hairs, but I mean, as I read it again, there is definite differences that do open up avenues to allow board members to take further action than they used to be able to.
What do you think, what are you thinking, John? Like, I'm just trying to,
Well, I mean, specifically for, you know, an influencing aspect, and where it says board members may not take make any decision involving a family member as defined below, employment status, including hiring, retention, promotion, evaluation, or compensation. Says something about in order to assist the board. There was a part. I mean, it doesn't talk about, board members may not participate in any manner in any aspect of employment policies which affect a family member. In order to comply with the requirements, it is fully expected that any board member in such a situation recuse themselves. So it doesn't actually state a action what's to be taken, you know, when a situation comes up. So we can, it's very loose to me what's expected if a situation like this comes up.
it's possible we could look at something around some recusal language.
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I can look at getting that integrated. And I think it's just too, the visual presentation, when you look at the current where it's just this big block of 18 lines, I think even just the visual nuance of how the other one is, where it's spelled out, even if we integrate that expanded stuff and then put recusal at the end, I think visually it's a little bit more easy to read and find some pieces in, so I can play around with that as well.
All right.
I just want to say that I kind of agree with Kurt when, you know, a couple of meetings ago where he said that it sounded overly restrictive to him. I would agree. I mean, I think the language around, you know, may not participate in any manner in any aspect of employment policies which affects a family member, that's such a broad category that most likely will have no repercussions on their actual employment status. It seems unnecessarily restrictive to not even be able to participate in something like we added in, for example, we added in 20 minutes of physical education for, you know, K-12. I mean, that shifts around some of the daytime. It's possible someone could interpret that then as, oh, well, that affected so-and-so's schedule because, now the schedule's different. So now technically you shouldn't have been able to be even involved in a discussion around that. It just doesn't make any sense. That's not ethically or morally there's no conflict of interest there. So things that have a conflict of interest, completely agree with. I completely agree that should be there. But when you say, when this language is written as this is, it's overly restrictive and I think unnecessarily so. And in that case, I agree with Kurt.
Yeah, look at that sentence, and the word, there are several words in there that kind of draw my attention, but it talks about board members may not participate in any manner in any aspect of employment policies. I'm not sure what that is.
So in the 500 series, again, it's pretty broadly written where you can interpret that. You know, the 500 series is about personnel. Is that any and all 500 series, or is it the ones around becoming employed? Is it the hiring of? it's unclear.
Because that I would agree, I mean,
Yeah.
hiring,
Yeah, you don't want that.
pay changes.
Yep.
Specifically pay changes to an individual, it's different, I think, if you're changing pay for an entire department, or entire subcategory, but I think I certainly would agree with individual employment, promotions, and the board doesn't necessarily really have anything to do with that anyway.
Well,
Pay raises, but not really hiring and firing of individual staff.
Well, and I think you're going where I was too, because that language in any aspect of employment policies, I think that is so general, it's better stated to say, well, what are they? And this version of the policy, as well as the one that legal had developed, talks about hiring, retention, promotion, evaluation, or compensation determination. And I think that's more precise than, say, employment policies, because I'm not sure exactly what that is. I mean, and when I say that, does that mean, like you said, it's the 500 series, or that means it's more generic, it's more specific, and that's an important aspect. Well, we've talked about several potential changes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll press on kind of that sentence around the any aspect and what that means, what our intent is, that we don't want to trip into conflict, and what does that look like, and how could we either further define that or lend clarity to that piece. So I'll solicit some support on those pieces and bring some language back.
Then we can change over to the employee version, 533.2, correct?
Correct, we were talking about this, we had tightened this up. We actually did make this a little bit more restrictive. When you look at the old versus the new, again, you can see that old language is with the numbers 1 through 37 are in that. And that's what it looked like before. And then you can see in its entirety, as well as we talked about putting this in, having it in both policy and the other. So it was just getting at those relationship pieces, and defining those. So we could look for alignment across the two here. We could look for.
So just to make sure I'm looking at these exhibits correctly, I know you just walked through them, sorry to have you walk through them again.
No,
So the one that's, go
in
ahead.
that very first one,
Mm-hmm.
when you click that link, it's got the left-hand numbering side, it's 1 through 37.
Mm-hmm.
In that following link, that's your current policy. It's got kind of personnel, staff conduct, and nepotism. But remember that had the board plus the staff in it, so we separated that out. That's what the lines 1 through 37, it's like the second half of that policy. And then in that.
So that's existing language,
That's-
but
yep.
just stripped out the.
But I
board part.
just stripped out the board part and put it in there with line items for reference. So it's that piece, and then the third is the nepotism employee that was supported with legal, that we were looking at when we decided that we'd want to explore what would updated language look like.
So you gave examples of where this would be a bit tighter. I don't know if you have any examples off the top of your head. I mean, we can certainly.
Well, we were looking at significant other, someone engaged to be married, if you're cohabitating, that kind of piece. Not legally married, but who resides in the same household. To John's point, what he was looking at for the board, what does that get at? So I think we could look at alignment across those two of those, but that's where we had tightened that up. So it's the tail end of that very first paragraph.
Yeah.
So we could look at that piece for consistency, but that was where we expanded that.
So let's in looking at this language, just want to remind the committee and myself, I think more specifically, as to the requirements of the policy, because the first two paragraphs are important, but are really introductory.
Mm-hmm.
It's that third paragraph. So what this really comes down to is no administrator or supervisor will employ under their direct supervision a person who's a family member.
Correct. Or contract with.
Contract with, said the other,
Yep.
or use your status as an administrator or supervisor to influence it.
Correct. And again, we certainly have people who are related in the organization. If you're the best candidate, we want you to come. We just don't set up those situations in which someone's involved in the hiring, the direct supervision, et cetera. We make sure there's layers in between. They're often at different sites or they're supervised differently.
Yeah, so the fact that, let's say, you have two teachers who happen to be siblings, and one works at one school and one works at another school, they have different supervisors. There's nothing in this policy that prohibits that.
No,
But
they
you
could
should
even
not-
work on the same campus and have a principal who oversees both of them.
But one should not be the supervisor of the other.
Correct. Same with if you're a spouse, if it's your child, you shouldn't have anything to do, I'm a veteran teacher, my child just graduated and we're hiring at X elementary school, you shouldn't be part of hiring, no part of selection process, you shouldn't be on that committee, you shouldn't have any undue influence in that piece.
And I raised that because, and we talked about changing the language and maybe including more factors in there, but really what we're just saying is, as long as one of those people are not either contracting with them as a contract employee or are supervising them directly, we're okay.
There's been no dispute or questions over this one. We just talked about putting it in both spots, policy and handbook.
Right. Other immediate questions or thoughts or concerns? My initial reaction is that when we bring this to the board, we should bring them as a pair, because otherwise if you don't adopt one but adopt the other, it gets messy, right?
Yeah.
So we want to bring them as a pair ultimately, so.
I think I can put them together visually that shows that integration, the strike through, and then some of our discussion points that we talked about specifically with the board one when I mock up some language there.
Other thoughts? All right. Let's move to the next agenda item then. Policy language related to metal detector use.
Yeah, we had an introductory conversation with the full board around, originally it was just a question that John had brought up around metal detection using the supplementary wands, and we were talking about we should really explore kind of the board's wishes on everything. So Dave Ross and Tim Harder presented preliminary information and did a lot of background research on how they're used, what policy language looks like, and we just pulled all sorts of samples. I'll have Tim walk us through, and those are the pieces that we'll just discuss tonight, like what is our vision for that, because then we can craft policy language around it. So Tim, I'll let you take over.
All right, sounds good. So in the board packet tonight, I apologize, I missed a page when we made the copy and posted online. So when you look in Word docs, there's 2 PDF documents in there, but the ones with the student searches on top of them, page 4 and 5 of 9, are just guidance from WASAB. So they are definitions of things from point of entry exits to types of searches that you may see on school property. However, they do offer a paragraph around the use of metal detectors. So no matter where we end up in this process, if it's just for specific search uses, all the way to we would look at entry and exit type of things, we will have some mandated posting and notifications to our families and communities about that usage. So that would be a change at minimum in a policy, but also in our student handbook that would be referenced at that same point in time. The rest of the packet that I have in front of you is really 3 different policies from three different school districts around Wisconsin to show you the vast difference in what you see. So the first policy in there is from Racine, Wisconsin, and their school district. It's a 1-page policy that literally talks about electronic scanning and security. They have some notification pieces at the beginning, talks about, a lot of these policies are written around weapons and coming into buildings. I'll just be open about that. Most of the time that's the type of language that you will see. Many of them also reference randomization of searches when you walk into a building. So that's what you're seeing here of either you are searching every single person or you have a specific randomized process, every 3rd person, every 5th person, whatever that might be. And then it talks about some different procedural things that go with this. Wherever we end up with this, unless we wouldn't bring in metal detectors, there would be probably at minimum an additional a first-time training and then a required yearly training for any of our staff who would do that. So that would be similar to how we do safe schools. We're doing some technology ones this year. This necessarily wouldn't be an online one. This would be an in-person type of thing that staff would have to go through. And really the policies outline the process of what this would look like if I were to search Jen with the metal wand detector and what to do. The second policy is from the Madison School District. Theirs is built into it what they call their investigation, interrogation, arrest, and search policy. But if you go to the 6th page, it's number 4 in there, it talks about the use of metal detectors. And it goes from the first paragraph in 4A there, talking about the principal saying if they have reasonable suspicion to use that hand wand, like what John was talking about, to be able to use as a search aid in a student, what that may look like, all the way down to some very specific random screening types of things, or in reaction to as needed screenings, as they call them, in something happened in the community or the neighborhood, we want to put this into play as we go forward. And they are very specific in who does the screenings, what happens, how many staff are on hand, and so forth. The larger the screening event that you have, the more staff that it takes on hand. Many of them also come with the fact that they are supervised by or in conjunction with the local police department at that point in time. So that if you do find something and you need law enforcement action immediately, there is somebody who is there for that. The last policy I have is out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And so this is their metal detector search procedures. And again, very specific to the processes of posting, how that would look in terms of if I was doing an event, if it's an individual student search, all of those different pieces that go there. But my hope tonight is to get kind of a guidance on what is the scope of we want to tackle in this policy. There would be some additional changes needed potentially in policy 446, which is the student search one. Sometimes that's a simple statement that says the district may use metal detector wands or metal detectors, and then you have a separate policy. Sometimes that can be incorporated in there. And then depending upon where we end up, we would also potentially have a change in 860, which is the visitor policy, which I believe is later on tonight. And so there are school districts, I believe it's Nicolay, Jen, you come from down there, they have a walk-through metal detector that every visitor is required to go through during the school day. So it's been a while since I've been on campus down there, but they had that at that time. So really looking for the guidance piece from the three of you of how broad are we looking here so we can write something that meets that needs. And then also giving you time to look at these 3 example policies of, hey, I really like this paragraph, this language, can you kind of morph this into one? And then we would come back with a policy at that point in time to have a deeper conversation.
Great. I appreciate the homework. John, I know you had brought this up as an idea, and maybe you can, if you wouldn't mind, maybe starting at least talking about what's your vision, or what are you thinking? That'll be a good starting point.
Sure.
Yeah, and I got a chance to look at some of these, look through these policies here, and I do like the Madison's, how they kind of word it as it's a, how they can use it as a randomized screening, that's kind of a, even, if it's not every day or week, whatever, once a quarter or something, it is somebody got a couple people at the doors and they can do it, we can write something up around there. Specifically, my thought was, drugs are all vapes now. Vapes have some sort of metallic items in there, and from what reports I've had, they're hard to find if kids are hiding them, and if they don't want to pull them out, there's nothing that can do anything. But with reasonable suspicion of a detection, that gives us, I think, a little bit better, a better stance on identifying drugs, in the school, being able to point those out. And I like some of these, how they identify the steps. If it detects a second time, then this is the process. You take them to a special room. There's another search criteria that happens there. Maybe law enforcement gets involved, because obviously that's something that they're trying to conceal. We move on from there. But yeah, specifically drug detection. Hoping we can catch vapes. I would be interested to see if we could do a test on that. I know the officers in school have metal detectors currently, see how it would even work. And I think that would be a good starting point to see if this is even a viable option to detect these kind of drugs. I know someone's got to have something in the office.
So I can speak to that a little bit, John. So I had a chance to talk to our chief and also our lieutenant who oversees our school liaison officers here. And I know they have metal detectors at their usage over there. I think they very much said it's a tool you can use to identify, but all of these policies go back to the time-true method of, I'm getting that slow in there, doing an accurate, real search of the student at that point in time. So it doesn't replace it, it's more that identification. I think some of the things I've read have become so it alerts on me to what nth degree can I go to prove that as an item, right? Even a police officer, and Chief Deering isn't here, so I don't want to speak in his world of how far they can and cannot go, is that tool for initial detection to say, hey, John, something alerted in your pocket, could you please empty your pocket, right? We can do certain searches, those types of pieces, but many of the policies are descriptive like you talked about. I think the reason being is if we don't have that, it leaves that whoever's doing that process open up to, you do it this way, Chris does it this way, I do it a different way, and now,
And we should have a standardized
yeah,
process.
there's a lot of legal things there and so forth.
But if all vapes have obviously a battery, a charging port, there should be detectable stuff, and I think that's a big problem in the school right now, from Badger all the way up.
Yeah, so what we talked about, and we told the chief that we were having a preliminary discussion tonight, and had used him as a resource when we were doing some of the background work, and he said he was more than happy to come and participate when we had a general sense so that we could really tighten that up, make sure we were in alignment. So I'll talk about those concepts, those pieces around doing, like you said, that random, how do we integrate that piece, what could they maybe use or test now and advise. So they were very willing to kind of support the development of this and come in and speak to the committee.
I would definitely say whenever we get something together, I think it would be, a good idea to kind of have some kind of clause in there saying if the student or individual does not wish to comply, then there's an automatic assumption. And, the assumption will have to be, I don't know what it's gonna be, I'll leave that up to, the discussion to kind of determine what the disciplinary action is gonna be, if it's a suspension or whatever. But then parents have to be involved at that moment. If they're not compliant, they don't wanna empty their pockets because they're afraid of what's gonna be pulled out, well, then the parent has to be involved, because that's gonna be the next course of who's gonna be able to get that information out of their student.
John, to your point, just to finish that, Chris, if you look at the Madison policy, it's, let me sign it here,
They have so many
4E.
fours in here.
Yeah,
Tim.
sorry, they have a,
We'll
they have a
remember ours a lot
statement,
better, friends.
yeah, they have a statement in there that says a student who refuses to comply with a screening may be determined to be in violation of the behavior and education plan. Now, I don't know specifically what that is for them, but to that point, there is a policy piece in there of referencing of, there is a consequence to refuse to be scanned at that point.
Right. Yeah, I would agree, that would be the next step to take.
Can we walk through just refreshing on current practice?
Yep.
So let's say today, perhaps our police liaison officers have metal wands. We, the district, do not. When I read these policies, it seems like it kind of goes down two tracks. One track is everyone or every third person or every fifth person walks through the metal arch, as I like to call it, kind of like at the airport, right? That's the general metal detection. Not intrusive in any in that sense. I think we're talking about not that angle. Instead, what we're saying is either everyone who's coming in, let's say to a football event, or everyone who's coming into the school in the morning, you pull the fifth person or third person and perhaps use a wand, or we don't do that at all. But instead, if a student in an individualized situation exhibits some sort of suspicious behavior, to use it as a tool to continue to investigate, right? So with that background, let's talk about current practice. So today, if we have a student who, let's say, exits a restroom and there's suspicion that perhaps they were vaping, walk me through what happens next generally. And I realize a million things could happen next, but generally speaking.
We'll probably feed off each other,
Well,
right?
yeah, and let's assume in my scenario that they were vaping and that they are concealing a device.
Yeah,
So
so
walk
in
me
that
through what
case,
happens.
Kes, you're coming down to the office, starts with an interview of the student, a request to search their bag typically. They'll ask to empty pockets and so forth. They also, as an administrator, will often ask for a law enforcement assisted search. So I've done a few of these where I've helped out at sites where we're gonna count on them to do the search. They do that much more regularly than we do and go through a lot deeper training on that. So that's that phenomenal relationship we have with them to go through and do some things at that point in time that maybe we can't do as a school in that search
And I was gonna say,
process.
that's what's important, is they're putting their hands on kids.
Right.
We do not.
My answer is.
They do.
Yeah.
They are doing, they're trained
Yeah.
with back and hand searches and they're making physical contact, which we do not. That's when we call them in. They're either on site, Badger here, or we call in another officer to any other school that we need. And we would hold that child so they couldn't dump anything, do anything. We would keep them contained and 100% supervision until an officer arrived.
Yeah, we get the, can you empty your pockets,
Mhm.
can you kind of go through your bag, those types of things, the hands-on searches. So often you will hear a police officer say, so you're asking me to assist in this search. And then we are working with them in collection with our memorandum of understanding and all that to go through that process, of which time then the officer is gonna go through that search, just like you would see if you went through the TSA or something like that, at that point in time. So that's the process we would follow currently.
What if they don't comply? What's the process if they currently don't comply with that? They're like, no, I don't want you searching me.
It's the same, that you're gonna have a degree of insubordination, that is, you're not complying with the officer at that point, so that could result in a citation being issued, in addition to school consequences.
The way I understand it, there is currently a search procedure if a student is outside the building without a pass and goes back in, correct?
Sometimes, if they've got suspicion around that, we've got
Because that would
cameras
be
in those
suspicious
lots.
if you go out to your vehicle
Anything
without a pass
suspicious.
anyways.
Yeah, I mean, they will have, what were you doing out there, those types of things. We don't search every kid who goes out to their car and comes back.
They might
because
have had a
maybe-
pass to
yeah,
do
Chris
it,
wrote
they
me a
might- yeah.
pass to go get my band instrument or whatever, my
Yeah.
book that I forgot or whatever else. Just like we don't search every kid that comes in the building, but it's that, a lot of times in every policy, it's that reasonable suspicion to search, to metal detect one, to ask you to empty out your
Question.
bag, to question. You have to have that reasonable search to start, unless you're gonna go through a randomized search or a search of everybody as they come in the building.
Yep, and I don't think that's feasible to do every day, obviously,
Right.
but, when we can, if we can do it once in a while, just to keep.
Well, and I think,
Sure.
to your point, John, the question becomes, do we write the policy about the specific student search and then some sort of randomized search, and then it becomes, is it just the school day, is it athletic events, is it?
Is it the community?
Where,
Is it
where
only
does
our
that end,
students?
right?
Yeah.
Take out the logistics aspect of that, we need all of the policy language to be able to pull that off, to be able to do that. So we can certainly look at a policy that would just be that student-specific reasonable suspicion and leave it at that, or we can try to combine it, like you see some of these that have both the student piece specific and the entrance to an event or a school at that point in time. That's really for the three of you guys to provide some guidance for us. And then certainly we could come back with both, and you could cross out one or the other, or send us down one or the other rabbit hole at that point.
And my thought is, I can't speak for the rest of the board, but we want to be sure to equip administration with policies that have the appropriate latitude for a broad variety of circumstances. And so when we were talking about metal detectors, I was intrigued. I'd like to see it even more around those general policies and practices, because a metal detector is useful in certain circumstances, it's not as useful in others. And so if we can look at something to make sure that we would equip administration and staff with as much appropriate flexibility as possible around student searches, obviously without being overly or illegally intrusive, that's always nice.
Yeah.
And what I also appreciate is, we have a tight relationship with law enforcement, and we reimburse certain costs. We should utilize that relationship to the greatest extent possible. I'm pleased to hear that we would have liaison officers involved in those types of situations. Because I think ultimately, we don't need to answer it right now. You kind of described this hypothetical circumstance. John's talked about certain ideas around metal wands or metal detecting wands. We talk about is, well, what additional lift would we get if we had either these policies or the wands? I mean, it sounds like it's not a broken process right now.
No,
But I think that'll help us determine, but either way, policies that give you folks the appropriate
Can I just
latitude.
ask a question? I wasn't here when this first came up, John, when you maybe first proposed it. Was your concern that police officers aren't willing to use handheld, like, they have access to them, but you're saying your concern is that they're not using them?
I don't think, so,
Because we could, I'm assuming we could request that, right? If we requested a search of a student, and we could say, hey, you know, we think you may have this in his pocket, I would assume they have access to using that, and that.
and I guess that's my concern, is that we have officers on the premises now, and we're not utilizing them, so why? Why haven't we been utilizing them in the meantime? And I know we have staff that walks the building, checks bathrooms, whatever else, and they're the ones that initially start the search process. If there's, you know, something that seems suspicious, let's come over here, start the search. And, I know, I've heard from some of that group, you know, it would be hugely helpful if staff had wands to do some of the searching when they don't empty their pockets and they think, you know, they stuffed it down their pants and they can, oh, well, you're either, let me see what that metal thing is, or I don't, you know, let me know what it is. Either you have a good explanation of whatever that is that you're not taking in your pockets or whatever, or we're gonna have to go maybe take this further. And right now, there's no way for them to identify other objects other than have everything on their pockets, because you can't touch them. You know, so I don't know if every situation would necessarily need an officer then, you know, because obviously the officers, we have 2 in the school, right? 2 in the high school.
Yeah, 2.5, there's one that works like a
One
split
floor.
shift for.
So-
Yep.
It's like, there's a lot of students and a lot of ground to cover, and I'm just assuming there's more searches than we have officers for, correct?
Sure, so freeing
I
up
don't
the
know.
staff and letting our staff have a little bit more preliminary access.
And John, I think the one thing I'm hearing you say is, you know, I look at our current 446 policy, it's about the types of searches a little bit and everything else. Many of these policies get into the very detailed process. We could certainly write this larger than, I think this is where you're going here, Chris, is not just about the metal detection one, but who can search? We don't want every employee in the West Bend School District saying, well, I'm gonna search John, you know, we have to go through reasonable suspicion, all that. But it's an administration, it's this person, this is where it gets
Authorized,
reported,
trained.
all those things, you go through your training and all that. These are our steps, of which at any point in time, you can call for an officer for a officer-assisted search. That could be spelled out more clearly in the policy versus just processes that are in play right now. And I think that's what you were kind of hinting at, Chris, to go larger with that.
Moving in the future, let's say this happens, and we have a policy written up, and then we determine the education side of the staff, you know, training. Are the officers that we currently employ with the district, are they certified instructors for these?
So the Chief Deering and I had initial conversations that whatever training we would do here, we would incorporate that process with them. We often, when we get into safety and security training, we defer to them. We are not the experts in
Right.
that. So they will come in and work with us. They actually are the ones, they said, so what would you buy, right? Like, I can go to many places to find a metal detector, right? And so they gave us a very specific, Chief Deering's like, yep, if you want the gold standard, that's the metal wand that you buy. Because if you don't walk through detectors, we have to have a little larger conversation. So we always defer to their expertise, and they're always willing to come to the table. I know the chief said he'd come and have the conversation with this group or the board. If we need some support in a training aspect, it will be either the SLOs themselves or somebody else within the ranks at the PD who would be a part of that conversation and that training and leading it out, so.
And you know, you're talking about how broad to make this, is there, wait, I'll let you answer. Is there any point where you're using metal detector on someone who's not a student? Member of the community or
Like
any
individuals.
scenario like that?
Like individuals attending a basketball game.
Correct.
Could be a visitor during the day. So currently you wrapped her into the system, you're escorted, like the Nicolay model, you would have to walk through a metal detector before you come in the building.
There certainly would be a lot of overlap there, you know, as it relates to, you know, we can't enforce detention on someone who's a general member of the public, but I think that's something
But
that
it is-
we at least should contemplate that.
It's
Well, you
our
can- yeah.
property and we can ask them to leave.
Yeah, you can stop them from entering at that point.
I'm gonna answer that question, yes, and then with an explanation. No, the reason I'm going in this direction is because I think what we should do is determine appropriate bounds for these general policies, because we may choose to use them in certain circumstances, others we may not, you know, but if it's not there to begin with, we don't have that latitude created. We don't want to be excessive with that latitude, but I think we should talk about it from the various ends. That establishes kind of the outer boundary. Then if we want to go into, well, what about magnetometers, whatever they call those arches, And then, you know, the one, that's fine, but I think we need to start kind of with those outer bounds. I don't know why we wouldn't want to say, you know, gee, if there's a member of the public that we think is doing something, you know, they're vaping and
Yeah,
they
they're
shouldn't
asked
be.
to leave, you
Right.
know, so generally, so if we were dealing with that, so, an easy one, like you said, is, I can remember not here, but being, you know, on the sidelines of a football game and, you know, someone's smoking a cigar. It's like, hey, can't do that here, you gotta do that. There's some kind of evidence, and you're giving them an opportunity to correct their behavior, or if you wanna continue that, leave. Same thing with their behavior, right? If I got someone yelling obscenities as a parent at a game or something like that, being rude to the official, like, you're gonna be asked to leave. And then at those points, when we're administratively, generally we have, that's why we do a split shift of our SLOs, so that they're actually present at events and, you know, so many of our evening activities, specifically high school. Then if I needed support in removing someone from property, then I can contact either that person on site or the actual police department for that support, around those things. So we can kind of take a look, like you said, kind of what are all those buckets, what would that look like as language, and then we'll work with the police department on that.
And I think it makes sense to kind of establish that larger outer parameter first, and then if we want to go further and talk about specific examples of how we're gonna use various technologies, to do it that way.
Mhm.
If we start with, well, let's pick, you know, magnetometers, and then, oh, by the way, now we need to fill it in.
Mhm.
I think it's better the former as opposed to the latter, if that makes sense, starting outward and
Yep.
work in.
And to your point, Chris, the Oshkosh example, I think Madison has it also, really, starts really broad, staff, students, and public.
Public, yeah,
And
anyone.
it's school, I'm gonna try to say, school-related functions, any school
Right,
district
anything.
facility. Like, it's pretty broad, and then says, doesn't happen all the time, but may happen. We're telling you it could happen, but we're never gonna tell you when it's gonna happen,
Yeah.
type of thing.
And I would
So-
assume all of this will run past legal once we come
Oh,
up
yeah.
with what we want, because
Yep.
obviously there's potentially some
Yeah.
legal.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I think the metal detector technology is great, and the wand technology is great, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form dismissing it. There are certain search techniques that are less intrusive and some that are more intrusive, and that one is kind of gravitating toward, you know, the more intrusive, especially depending on, you know, which portions of the body contraband may be
Yeah.
concealed.
What's our scope of authority? Because there is one there.
And clearly, there are others that have dealt with this, but I think,
Mhm.
you know, to your point, we need to make sure that that is crystal clear.
Yeah, you don't want a staff member to all of a sudden be somehow, or the school district to somehow be liable for violating the civil rights of some kind.
Mhm.
Okay with the general direction, or?
Yeah, I think the broader scope of, you know, what we can potentially use it for, but kind of, you know, specifically, I think focusing on the school hours and the, you know, some of those things, you know, initially, you know, at least diving in and setting, you know, those standards, I think I think that's kind of a good general, I think that's kind of what you're going at, right? General,
Exactly, yeah.
then kind of
Start
diving
with the
into what
general,
it is.
and then move to the specific, yes.
And again, all this, you know, legally, I don't know how intrusive this really is, because you're essentially, you're asking permission. If they don't comply, then you're not doing anything. You know, so,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the technology, and I'm optimistic that with the proper training and protocols, when used properly, we're fine.
right,
When used improperly, we're not fine.
It's,
So-
to your point,
you
John,
can't force someone, hey, come over here, start
Yeah.
scanning them.
Correct.
to
Exactly right.
WSAB's legal piece around this and the background piece, they talk about the metal hand wands actually being a little more intrusive than the walking through,
Because
because
you're
it's
closer.
specific areas
Your
closer
face.
and all of that.
Okay.
But everybody seems to say one or the other. They don't say we just use this or that technology typically, so that they can have both at their
Yeah, and
disposal as they write a policy.
I think the bigger pitfall would, when I look at the difference between them, is a walk-through metal detector is we're not targeting, there's no perception of targeting, it's every single person who walks through the door, you're essentially consenting by saying, okay, I'll walk through that, versus specifically asking certain students to come get wanded because of suspicion. That's where I think you open yourself, where you have to be a little bit careful and open yourself up to some legal,
And,
you know,
and I'm not opposed to going that direction if that's
Mhm.
like, you know, but that just seems, the cost, I don't think we'd be able to fit in the budget, that's. I don't know how much one of those giant ones are.
They're about 5,000 a unit roughly, and that's a budgetary
Yeah.
Yeah.
number.
That's
It's
not
not
bad.
too bad, no.
But then you have to have how many of them to get
Staff
2,000 kids in, plus the staff, plus the number of law
Oh, yeah, yeah.
enforcement.
Yeah.
Like, it adds up really fast
So you
to that
thinking-
point.
What would you probably do for something like that, 2 per
Dave-
door?
Dave and I talked about the numerous entrances we would have to
Like two
open at the high
entrances?
school,
Yeah.
because you really couldn't funnel 1,000 kids through each entrance. You would have to use almost every main entrance with multiple detectors, and then if we're gonna use like Oshkosh's language, monitored by law enforcement, I would now have to have potentially 5 to 6 officers there in different locations.
What if we were just to do a trial? I mean, cause we have the money set aside, how much was it, $200,000 that we have set aside? You know, and we have officers on hand to potentially sit there, you know, in the morning hours when they're coming through. What if we potentially did a trial on just one side? I mean, yes, you would get the students that are gonna skate around it, and how helpful would it be, but initially you might get some,
Yeah, we can consult with
Okay.
the chief
I just-
around what that could look like.
you know,
Yeah.
is there a way to rent one for a few months?
I don't know about renting one, I think, we gotta have the policy, but I go back
Yeah.
to Chad's piece of, we'd actually be better off in a randomization, and then a very clear, so a lot of these say second, fifth, eighth person,
Yeah.
so that it's not me just picking, well, I'm picking Chris today because he's got a light blue shirt on, or whatever the reason being, being very specific and covering that.
Well, and I think, like you said, some places have them, you know, in school spaces. We're very familiar in public spaces, having them in some capacity, but how did you do that? What did implementation look like? What are those pieces? Again, I'm familiar with, and we were at Nicolay, it's just one, but we used it not during the opening, but any visitor thereafter.
Yeah.
You know, after your school day started, and kind of what's the context in which you use
The-
it. So we can coordinate with others who use them.
The readings
What that
that
looks like.
Dave and I have done in the research were schools who have these, maybe don't do them every day, but they have teams, they're basically their own security teams, who today, the 5 of us are at Badger Middle School. Tomorrow, the next day, we're at East High School, we're at each place for a week or two, and you rotate some of those things around, but you're gonna have a larger team of needs at that point in time, for that half an hour of opening at that point.
Good comments. Sorry we throw more homework your way.
No, I think we've got a good direction and
Believe it or not, I
start
actually like policy.
to
Well,
bring.
That's all right, Chris.
No, so do I. But the idea of kind of starting with that outer bound, because we can't agree to the outer bound, we're not gonna agree to the inner bound.
I think you all three gave some good feedback of things we consider and kind of morph some of these different pieces, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
On that
And
one.
thank you, Dave, too.
Yes,
Thanks, guys.
Dave voted me here to stay late, so.
All right. Next is discussion of policies in the 800 series, which are school community relations.
Correct. So again, school community relations, if you click on the scan packet, I listed all the 800s. But if you follow that public one, you certainly
Oh, I'm
don't
gonna
if
stay
you
for
want.
this
Yeah.
series. I like this series.
You're
Tim
welcome
does
to-
like policy.
You're welcome to stay for as long as you like.
I really actually like policy and Jim will vouch to that. I'll sit and read and write that.
He does. So we look at the 800 series this evening. So in 810, you have general school community relation goals. There's no specific template for that. You can see it hasn't been updated in quite a while. You know, I think one of the biggest pieces, this is just talking really generally around pieces, and giving that designee. One thing that draws my attention, we don't say Board of Education in our policy, we say school board as a consistency piece. There's nothing out of bounds, it just hasn't been updated in a while. And I pitch it to you as board around, I think one of the largest things that all of you talk about is our communications with the public and you as a board and all of those pieces. So is this a spot to look at perhaps having a specific communication plan, having some goals, something that we revisit annually around the purpose of communicating with the public and, you know, what you want to see in that? Because I think it's really, and that shifts so often, right? There's been a lot of changes in how we communicate since 2014. So do we want to write it, you know, around our value of that? Like I said, there's nothing in here that's bad, I just think it could be, maybe it's something we're really intentional on visiting and creating some goals, where we have an entire position dedicated to communications. And there's certainly plans and strategies and things that we've done to support our community, our families, everyone. So I just leave that to you to look at, consider, and how you'd like us to take this one.
I don't know that the purpose or the mission statement of communication would really change. I mean, the purpose is still the same. The way that we do it, or updating policies around social media usage or methods of communication, probably need updating from time to time. But I mean, I think the goal is still the same, is to get appropriate information to the concerned parties.
I'm intrigued by the idea of, you know, incorporating goals into this. When I'm looking at, we're looking at 810 right now.
And 810, what I would say is you don't so state the goals, but you just talk about the intentionality there, and that you would have a plan and say you would revisit it annually or something of that. Because right now there's nothing in that. And again, as I speak with the board, things that we're working on, connecting policy to something that we're systematically reviewing and kind of cultivating as a district. So not necessary, just, you know, a piece. Again, if all of us weren't sitting at the table and say that we value this, and if, you know, we were going tomorrow, does the policy keep this alive, this intention of being, you know, really communicative with our community and our families and things like that. So there's nothing inherently wrong, otherwise I would just recommend we change school board instead of Board of Education for consistency. But you can take it however, no matter what, we'll be bringing forward our plan for communication and our goals. So we would do that anyway. I don't need a policy to direct it. It's just if you want to codify that in language, that you would annually review or semi-annual review, you know, what your expectation is as a board here.
So you anticipate my question, which was, will we as a board continue to receive, let's say, an annual update with regard to, well, here's a communication plan?
Yeah, in our watch, we have specific goals around that. Nancy and I work on that. We're updating that last one. We, you know, we've reviewed, revised, tweaked over the last couple of years, but we'll bring something a little bit more robust back to the board to look at. But so again, not necessarily just putting everything out there for consideration.
I don't know that it's a bad idea to put something like that in there, because it shows what action the board is going to take to help ensure that everything here is happening. If you want to propose
Sure.
that, we can think about it a bit.
Yeah, why don't I put what that might look like?
Yeah, the only
just
reason I
as a
pause,
update.
the only reason I pause is because I don't think it's broken. And
No.
so
Yeah.
sometimes you don't want to tinker with something that's, you know, but if this is something that normally would be done and can help demonstrate, well, the board receives an update as to administration's plan related to communication.
Yeah.
It does kind of put this into play then. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, we move to the next one then.
811, again, no template, no anything, just encouraging our staff to be an active part of the community. You know, we have a lot of staff who live and work in the communities we serve, which is wonderful, but
I have no problem with this one. I thought this one's a bit more aspirational. Kind of sets context a bit. And other comments, other questions on this one? None? All right, we'll move on to the next one.
the next one, 823, take a look at the first two pages. That's our current policy, last updated in 2014. I pulled and put together what the most recent language is. Again, it's significant, different. In the blue, you've got some editor's notes. This is the WASB suggested language as discussion points. So kind of looking at what we'd like to see, and I think this was a 2022 update from WASB in theirs. But again, you're declaring who the legal custodian for records is, both do that. And then there's just some other decision points.
So, I'm sorry, I just wanna make sure I'm clear on this, the 823 and 823.1, you're saying that?
Nope, they're two separate.
They're two separate,
So I want you to look at 823, it's the first 2 pages.
got it.
Following right behind it is another 823 in updated language. And then there's some blue because those are discussion points, I left those in. And this is the most recent template from WASB on that. And you can see it's just a significant departure, so instead of trying to mesh it into strike-through language, I just present both side by side for you to take a look at. And it's around, again, declaring the custodian of records and
Where are these?
I don't have that.
Sorry, the WASB one.
if you look at the packet,
Oh.
yep, the scan packet, I'm just following us right through that packet.
Oh, the
So if you
scan.
click on that, there you
Sorry,
go.
we're tempted, we were clicking
Yeah,
on individual links.
Individual policies.
No, thank you.
I was doing the same thing.
That's okay. I scan it all together for ease and
Got
kind
it.
of just walking through.
I have a question on number 7, page 4, on the scan document. Number 7 says, any costs or fees incurred by official legal custodian of the record shall be directly reimbursed by the board to this custodian. I was unaware that the board has an account of some kind.
You do. So you have an account in the budget. It sits in my office, and it's things that we would spend money on behalf of the board. Legal fees, your WASB
That's
dues, all of those
when you
kinds of
say
things.
reimbursed by the board directly, you just mean it comes
Your
from
board's
that
account.
fund. Got it, okay, that's fine, yep, that's what I.
And we can be clear on that.
Just general question there, item number 5, the fee schedule. So it talks about the schedule developed to cover the actual costs related to location and reproduction of any records in the district. And I'm just curious, I mean, if records need to be printed, I'm sure there's a cost to that. I mean, I'm thinking, you can think of personnel time, electricity, right, how far do we go when we
There's
say
actually
actual costs?
very few assessed costs because of the electronic nature
Yeah.
now of records. So you're really looking at, we have no obligation to create a record, it's, if something exists, and if it's obscure and we're gonna have to spend time or talent, we kind of assess that. We might run that through WASB to do a checks and balance on legal around, are we tripping into X, Y, Z? But we do have an obligation to do that, and, even if I trip into some legal costs or, there's certain cases where I can't recoup those, it's just an obligation I have to provide information to the public. So in very few cases,
What about staff, so someone has to spend 7 hours searching through emails for the requested records, is there some reimbursed cost for that employee's time?
when you start looking at, so when you're saying searching emails, things like that, so I'm working with Tim Harder to go through a search, and what usually happens is the scope is so huge because it's tripping on a keyword, we'll actually work directly with the requester. So I might initiate a first, saying, this is yielding 20-some thousand records based on these words, let us help you with your search. And oftentimes, we're having them call us and helping them, what is it that you're really seeking, how are you doing, and we help them get the information they need and narrow that without incurring that cost to do that, so.
With everything being electronic for the most part, Chad, my time is limited, so when you talk about what you can charge, it's the time I actually type in, I search and I make the PDF. If I have to have somebody redact out personal information, that doesn't
Yeah, I
get
can't
billed
go
out.
after
So
that.
my time is one of the few that actually can be billed out to the end user, so if you don't ask for it for print, there's very little cost at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we do have legal costs associated with, garnering public records, things like that, but again, those generally aren't passed along, they're just kind of a burden to bear as we provide information and making sure we're following everything we need to do.
Any other questions on, this is 823, correct? Public
Correct.
access, okay.
Mhm.
Any other questions on 823? actually, let me pause for a second, because we've got the WASB, so we have what we have, and then we have what WASB
Correct.
suggested.
So when you look at 823, the updated template, again, that's for language from 2022. I've left in blue different notes around what you should consider in discussing adoption of this language, right? So you can see the custodian of records. So generally, the superintendent serves as the legal custodian of records, right? So state law permits the board to designate one or more positions. You know, how do you want to do that piece? So usually it's the superintendent and designee, but I left the language here for you to look at. Because I might be working with Tim to execute a search. I might be working with Andy. You know, we've had, you know, people requested the bus bids, you know, as a records request. Great, all right, Andy, let's compile this. So I'm working with staff to do that. And it's just saying where records are. So I think you could tighten that up a little bit. But I think it spells out nicely what are records. Because we talk about that when we onboard, you know, the board, what's a record? And when does it become a record? When are you acting or serving in that capacity? And when do you become the custodian of your own records? Because I don't look at your own devices, but there's sometimes where something on your own device could be used or considered as a record, but you have to assume responsibility as the custodian of that. That's why we urge you to, as a point of practice, go through your district email, or if people are sending you separate messages and it's board business, just sending them a message back saying, hey, I do board business through this email, so it's captured. Forward it to yourself, respond from there. That's just, because again, then that burden falls right back to us to be the custodian of those records. So I think that is nicely spelled out there. I think because that's one of the biggest questions that we do during the onboarding process. Tim and I tag team that together.
And we do that with our teachers, right? Like all of our staff are talked about the fact that we're all public record here.
And one of the other pieces, instead of policy, local public offices, you can use the alternative and put the offices, positions that are considered local public offices for the purpose of public records law are listed in that notice, and we can put that right online so that you're always keeping it. You can actually name those people and update that so that it's really clear instead of like just general, like a principle of this or that. We would just update that as we need it and keep that record live, that it can be found here and here's where that's updated. I would recommend that, just for ease and information for people.
The proposed policy, or the WASB version, does go a bit more granular, and in this case, I like it because this is a very process and procedure kind of policy. And I too like the part around more spelling out specifically, or I guess really more so reminding school board members that this is what we need to do. As I read through this, I don't think there's anything in here that deviates from our current responsibilities. It doesn't create any responsibility artificially that we wouldn't already have under open
No,
records.
we've always had that obligation. I think it just cleans up that pieces, updates the language, and then I would be really transparent around having that updated listing always maintained on the website. I could put it as a piece right with the policy, you know, see here for, and link it right below it as a supplementary piece so that, again, ease of user.
So if we adopt the WASB version of this, the list at the end where it's detailed by individual, or not that one,
Yep.
the local public offices section, I guess, it's, I'm assuming that's kind of the people that are in charge of the documents
So I
for
would,
school?
yep, so if you follow right under that heading, the editor's note,
Mm-hmm.
instead of, and this is what I would recommend, is we use to replace it with the following statement that they recommend. The offices and positions that are considered for that are posted in a notice. So then I would have that as a separate posting so that it's always live with their names, their contact, everything. And it
But-
would be a supplementary piece.
But individual school principals are the custodians of those?
They might have school records, they still would have to check in with me on things. So I've had people make a request of a principal, I want XYZ records. They're checking in with us because we're well versed in the law on that, but they're considered a custodian of certain records as well. So let's say a family, I want to come in and see my child's cumulative file, I can make that request right to a principal, and you go in and go look at it.
Right, but so it's considered a local public office. Is that what this is saying? So do we have to like a vote for that though? And does somebody have to accept that
Oh, you,
position?
you
No.
talk about whether that's an elected position.
Yeah, no, I see what
Is
you're
this
saying
question?
now. No, it is not.
Okay.
And we can try and add some language that makes that a little bit more clear. Because like you said, that's the assumption is every office that's held is elected.
Okay.
I'll make note of that and get some language around it.
Yeah, I guess I kind of just understood it as maybe, kind of the board, the president, vice president, whatever.
Yep.
Maybe that we had to have a.
Yep, I see what you're
accept that
saying.
position and responsibility for
Mhm.
that position, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're doing is when you approve the policy is you're saying the superintendent is the leader of all this. And then this is how it's going to work.
I wonder if in the-
Which is not unusual and it's not out of alignment with our current processor.
So some revisions to come back on that one?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, and I'll get, like I said, a little clarity in those pieces, and then I'll bring what that notice would look like. I'll mock that up so that you could see that as a supplementary piece.
Okay, let's see, communication to public. The official notice, RN, the fee schedule is all there. All right, so the next one is 8:30, is that right? Use of facilities?
823.1
Oh,
does
sorry.
not currently
Procedure
exist.
for release, no wonder I skipped over that one.
Yep, it doesn't currently exist. And you can do a general statement and nestle it into the records piece, but this talks about records management and retention. And they actually just released a full new schedule that's gonna take some comprehensive work around that. So this is, and WASB recommends, it's not a mandated policy, but they do recommend having a comprehensive 823.1 as a separate piece for management and retention and how we're going to maintain records in compliance with that. And we would want to follow, again, we get a records retention schedule that is released to us. And then they just did some comprehensive work. So it used to be that the Department of Public Instruction kind of culminated all these pieces and put it together, and they would release that annually. So we could adopt it, we could even put in our policy, we're choosing to follow that, and that's what I'm going to look at, right? And so it would be a rolling piece that I stick with those updates. They actually just had the department take all that out, because it could be seen as competing, because their agency oversees, like, this is what personnel records are, and here's this, don't dually state it. So now we'd have to kind of go to all the buckets. So it requires that I have to call the Historical Records Society, I have to determine what's on file with us right now. I'm gonna have to cross-match those pieces and then update our records retention schedule so that we're in alignment. So it's a fairly complex process because you're determining student records, personnel records, business records, all these different pieces, every single different department. So we've actually, I've shared with our executive team, and we've all already started digging in and, went to HR, like, did you see this? This is the new guidance for your department. I need you to take a look and we'll start doing that work. So this is just showing our policy a little bit clearly. Again, we have nothing, and I could do something more general, they just don't recommend it. So it's kind of what direction the board would like to take.
So back to what you were saying before as it relates to, because with the records retention policy, the periods of time that you're gonna keep records, that's often the trickiest thing to come up with. You were talking earlier about you receive that guidance?
Yep, we follow that. So the only change that they've made recently is that DPI, they had them unpack those other pieces. So I have to go to a couple different silos to get that guidance. And that's the only difference. And we would want to maintain, so I'd want the language written so that I can roll with those changes and implement those. So that I don't have to bring back as a policy discussion. And then we keep that on file. You can see that, like, what does that schedule look like? but then we would be able to update it.
Yeah, so there are a lot of words here, but
Uh-huh.
but there are, as I look, it does really appear that each section has a good purpose. So I like, for instance, under records retention and disposition, which is Roman numeral 4, it talks about one of my favorite things in my profession, litigation holds. But it defines that and what that is and what the responsibilities are, audits and such. And also that, maybe Tim can comment on this, but Roman 5, which is converting the district records into different formats. I mean, I view that as, if you have it in paper, it's okay to convert it to a scanned image and save it. But if you do that, you still have to save it for the appropriate period of time.
Yep,
Is that how
that's
I
correct.
read
Yep,
that
so
right?
we've done that. And also, we believe it applies to when somebody asks for a record, how I give that to them. So example, you ask for an email, which comes in a different file format, but ends up in a PDF in your request at that point in time. But we still hold to those things. So we have gone through some processes of digitizing old records here, even old transcripts, microfiche and some other things over the years to hold them digitally at that point.
So this hasn't existed ever in policy language, so I would recommend we put some policy in, but we'll probably take just a little bit more time as a team to unpack all that new guidance so that you could see with it, what does the records retention schedule look like?
I think that would be good. That'd be,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm kind of geeky on this stuff too. I think that would be interesting.
Mhm.
Also, I'd like to see a version of this where, you know, there's the optional stuff that WASB said, insert if desired.
Yeah.
If administration would be interested in putting together okay, if you were writing it, what might you fill in these blanks with? That would be
Perfect.
good to see as well.
Yeah, might as well see it complete.
Exactly.
Seeing something that would give us an umbrella of policy and then allowing us a little time to do the work so that we're
Yeah.
bringing you the policy language plus here's what it looks like, and then we can put that in play.
Exactly.
Because
So that,
again, knowing there are updates forthcoming to it.
right, and if that's right, so we may not see this at the very next policy. committee.
Correct.
We'll see it in the
Correct,
future. though.
yep.
Good. You're on to 8:30. Use of school facilities, I think.
8:30 is, yep, it's use of school facilities, so we've got some regulations, we've got the different groups that we do, and then some different tiers of charges that we work with. So facilities use is, a group would fill out a form online, and then they can go in and access the calendar, and they work with the scheduler to look at, because we're not only using them as schools, but our communities use our buildings. They are the community schools. So we have all different groups accessing our schools. So this is kind of laying a foundational piece. You want it flexible enough. You do have a priority. You always want priority for yourselves first in your own things and to reserve that right. And then I'd keep the fee schedule separate so we're not having to do that all the time. I did take a look at 834 that follows it. That's just another district and some more updated language. I don't know where ours originated from. I think it originated from some different pieces. If you look at 834, you have a couple things. For 834, you can do a general one. 834 is actually the correct numbering. The 834 sample in front of you is a generalized 834. However, you should know that WASB has a numbering system. You can do 834.1, district equipment or third-party public use. You're on my playground, you're using my equipment there. Use of performing arts facility is a 0.2, 0.3, fitness facilities. So some have a community center for fitness, like South Milwaukee has its own community center. Use of the aquatic facility, use of the school forest, those can all be subbed out in some way, or you can do a more generalized one.
Do we think that making it more specific as opposed to more general would be helpful? I mean, again, I'm not necessarily hearing that anything is broken. On the other hand, if
No.
it's something that follows the WASB template a little bit more closely, we pay good money for good reason. for
They don't
WASB.
have a template for any of those, they're just telling you that if you would so choose, this is the numbers that you'd identify. No significant issues with that. We deal with that through outside of policy, you know, getting groups vetted, making sure they have appropriate insurance, that we're working with them, we're scheduling things, and it's when to pass along fees. And again, I would have that fees separate, not tied into policy. It's just something that's understood, and that we could bring that fee schedule to the board annually for review or updates. And again, just considering, you know, if they're serving our students and how we want to do that, kind of what that piece is. I don't know that we're addressing liability in ours. They do sign some pieces, they have to show proof of insurance, there's things, but I know that in my former life, when I did the 834, you can see I have a liability piece right baked into the policy. So it's just kind of what pieces do you want in policy, which pieces are part of the practice. Because there's some things we could put in, you know, an AR, which is an administrative rule, which is complementary to the policy.
So make the text of the policy a bit more light and
Analyzed.
focused, and then put the procedural, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, the
Maybe that-
administration.
Yeah,
So,
maybe that follows and
yeah, this is long,
like you said, the preference.
But-
Mhm.
but important.
Yeah, but I just think it's if you're really gonna use the facilities are here, as we said, they're here for all of us, they're the community's facilities, so our commitment to that piece, and here's how you access them, around that, and what our expectation is. You know, that you're gonna leave them in good repair, we're not held liable.
Unless you are an individual or a small ad hoc group,
Which is that
then you are not allowed to use the facilities.
Correct, because you wouldn't have the insurance piece. So I can't have a parent call me and say, hey, I wanna host my birthday party at Badger for my kid. You're not gonna carry the appropriate, grouping or insurance to meet that test. So I think spelling that out. But that's what that's for.
Yeah, and there's other avenues for that anyways in the community and the
Yep.
park stuff and.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
But, you know, a lot of our, you know, our buildings are most often used by those junior teams, right? Who are using our spaces, our junior basketball teams, junior, you know, those pieces who are community affiliated organizations, but they have all the appropriate insurance, things like that. We just allow the chamber to use for the, all around the bend, they're signing off on those pieces, so they're being vetted through the process.
Looks good.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing here generally is to give priorities to functions or groups. Well, it sounds like that have insurance, but the other is, we like insurance. But the other aspect is that it has some tie to education or tie to the school district or the community at large. So in other words, if I said, hey, could I use this for my family reunion, that would fall into the, well, I'm an individual, that's not really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I'll bring you, what I can do is kind of, like I said, put an umbrella to it and then some detail
Yeah.
to it and bring it that way and show a little bit more clearly where that preference lies. Because you'd also, in my past, I've had preference, our own teams and schools and everything, that's priority, right? And I can bump people out if something comes up. I can bump people out and say, hey, we've got to reschedule, or I need to move you to a different facility, right? I've got something going on. So you've got that, but then you can give a secondary layer of preference to, the next one is organizations that are serving predominantly our students. So let's say I had, I'll pick on Germantown, their neighbor. You know, I've got a youth league over there, they're gonna vet the facility, they're gonna do that, but they want my gym. But that's not really our students and our youth team, right? So even though our youth team, let's say basketball, right? I know the person, he'd never be late on his request ever. Let's say girls basketball. I'm gonna make him watch policy, so he knows this. Where our youth team, you know, I would give preference to ours. Even though I got this request in first, I would give preference to our students, even though that's not my team. I can more clearly articulate that, which is the right thing to do,
Yeah.
because they'll get filled up right away.
I think it's laid, I mean, I think it's laid out pretty clearly.
Mhm.
I don't have an issue with how it's written.
Yeah,
I mean,
So like you said, maybe visually make it that a little less long, where you can get your eye where it needs to be.
I like the
those
examples,
pieces.
I mean,
Yep.
that's good use, and then
Yeah.
also, it would be nice if the fee schedule or a reference to where we can find that fee schedule is
Mhm.
located within the policy. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm seeing that, or maybe
Well,
that's just it.
and maybe not within the policy, but right under where we put that supporting piece, right?
Yeah, just
So we
something,
can do that, yep.
because
So you're
obviously,
not
because
searching.
they're gonna change, I mean, I get
Yep.
that fee schedules change, but it'd be nice to have a link
Why
provided
don't
where
I-
you could click
Why
to
don't I
the current fee
review the
schedule.
fee schedule along with it? Because we should review that as well,
Sure.
because then we can bring it to the board as a package to
Yeah, that's a
adopt.
good idea.
Here's the policy, here's this, here's reinforcing the practice and the fees for
Yep.
the upcoming
I
year.
think that's the only thing I would add.
Awesome, we will do that.
Do we have anything in here that states in his law, I was trying to find it, but, that says something about anybody using our facilities held to the standard of our board policies? You know, because anybody using it should be held to the same standard that, you know, our district follows.
In what way, so they're gonna be
In-
held to all the policies on property, you can't have alcohol, you can't
Yeah,
have do all
okay.
that, all those things are in other policies, and they
Sure.
report on that, but I'll make sure that it's super clear in these, because we were talking about, I mean, we just had that incident where they had a raffle item of alcohol, like, you cannot have that on
Well,
school property.
No, that's a great point. So in other words, if a very community-minded, well-respected organization said, we would love to have wine tasting.
No.
No, right, because we would say that would violate the alcohol
So
policy.
you can, here's how you do that. I had to do that in my former district because we had very limited community spaces. We are blessed here in West Bend where we have so many, to John's point, there's so many alternative spaces in our community. But in my last community, we didn't have any. We were the rain site for their concert series. At a massive property, it was all of that, but they wanted to allow carry-ins. So on these dates, for this window of time, we suspended the board policy for that piece. We allowed absolutely no sales, no anything, and they allowed that piece, so.
Sure.
But again, here, I don't see any reason for it, there's so many other opportunities.
Even in that case, that would require suspension of board policy. So really,
Exactly.
board
So
policy
you
does
can't,
bind
but
them normally.
It does, but we can be, like, to John's point, in the supplementary, Dave and I talked about a brochure that you get, even like, here's what you can and can't do, and here's the expectation. Because the other piece is too, things that could cause damage, you know, because you'll get a team come in, and I wanna come in for this purpose and all that, and they're doing batting practice in your gym during the winter months, that's a hard no, because you're gonna do damage to my facilities, so you should not be doing that. So that, to those points, you know, what's allowable, what's not, and that can run a whole continuum.
When people agree to, or when you agree to let somebody use facilities, do they also agree to a damage waiver of sorts?
A what?
Damage waiver of sorts?
They have to provide insurance,
Okay,
and
so-
that, like I said, I like the liability language I had in my last one, and I put that a little bit more transparent in this policy, but they're providing us with insurance, and that's why that really boxes out individuals
Mhm.
from utilizing our facilities in that manner.
Right.
Good, I've got a
Very good.
direction, yeah.
Takes us to, are we on 8:31?
8:31, that's current, no recommendation for changes. And that's, again, getting on all the restrictions around tobacco, nicotine, vape products on property. And you, again, have a supplementary but not competing policy on the student side, banning them from anything.
I remember seeing this, it was
Mhm.
adopted March 7. If I remember right, this was heavily based on if it isn't the WASB policy. Maybe I'm wrong
Yes,
on that.
yep.
Yeah.
It's updated.
I'm just curious why there's a carve up for pepper spray being allowed. It's just interesting that one is, there's 6 qualifications for when weapons can be allowed in school.
I'm talking about the tobacco, nicotine,
Oh, sorry,
vapor,
yep.
I'm not on that one yet.
Oh, sorry. I thought
That's
you-
okay,
I thought-
you're
no,
just-
that's all right. I thought we
you're
addressed
advanced.
that one.
So
Let's
hearing
go
no
to pepper spray.
questions, clearly.
Yeah, let's move to the next, weapons.
So in that first one, again, you can tell our old ones have got that staggered headline. We've got 832, which is weapons on school property, and some carve-outs, as Dr. Chemez was noticing. That was last updated in 2016. Right behind it, you see WASB's most recent template. Again, some carve-outs on pieces, you know, what is a weapon, but the times, and we've talked about this, the times that you might have a non-functioning weapon, a Civil War reenactment, and I'm bringing, a musket or something, things like that, and those are, yes.
Play.
Yeah, there's, a drama performance and, things of that nature. We no longer use, starter pistols way back, how we did when I was Meiji myself, but we did have those would be for things. We don't, they use a very shrill whistle.
Sort of administration's initial thoughts on the current policy versus WASB, any strong preference or?
We don't have hunter safety classes, as part of our curriculum of those pieces, so I think it gives us a carve out in the new, where you needed hunting, maybe allowed on school property for those things. We don't have those. If we offered that in some way, we'd bring that forward. That would have to be, like a community use group, and I would expect to bring that forward, for consent, on those pieces. So, I don't have a school forest, so I don't think you need that bullet at all. Because some do, so you don't, so again, this is their
It's like-
template, I don't have a school
You're
forest.
talking about the spot behind the soccer field, is that?
Exactly, yeah, the stand of trees behind the football field, no. So you would strike that, and I've left again, kind of that, hey, where do you want to include, some pieces? But it's getting at those pieces. To your point, it's around, Chad, the holdover on pepper spray, is in alignment with that statute, so you weren't, like, if someone came to a football game and they had that on them, that's fine, but, any student can't have that.
It's over from the
Yeah.
Question about, it says in the WASB policy,
Mhm.
page 20 in our documents, on the bottom says any student who possesses a firearm or destructive device, and talks about expulsion, record for expulsion. What about what about things that like ends up being a fake fire, or does that include like a BB gun, does that
No,
include like a
it
paintball gun?
specifically does not, and that's where you're defining a weapon, and that's up top. You could write a little bit more, on that, but you're following on statute, the 948.61 to define what that is. A BB gun does not count, some of the lookalikes don't count those pieces. So we could lend itself to a little bit more
Well, do we
clarity
have-
there if you want.
Do we do we have currently a separate policy for discipline around a student who brings in a lookalike firearm without pre-registering? Like, it says you can do it for plays and things, so if you let the superintendent know ahead of time.
Yeah, you have to be authorized for
Right,
that.
so what's our current policy
So you're
around
gonna
someone
find
who might do that? I'm sorry if I'm
Yep,
not.
you're gonna find that in the 400 series, and that was, yeah, thanks, 443. It's nice to have a
But
team.
it-
443.6.
I mean, this talks about lookalike. The policy of the district is no weapons, lookalike weapons or ammunition are allowed. So a BB gun would be considered a lookalike.
I can punish you,
Right, I was just
I
wondering
can
what
punish you for all
what
those,
the punishment for that was.
Yeah.
but in some, you're automatically out for it's automatic, right?
Gotcha.
It almost takes a little bit of the local control out of it, but it's in that scope of, it gives you back more authority on how you punish that.
Gotcha.
Which one?
443.6 is the student.
Thank you. Student use and possession of weapons, 443.6. Any kind, anytime. The facsimile of firearms, all of that's prohibited for students. I mean, kids just can't have anything. But this is, remember, so this is talking about weapons on school grounds. It means anyone. This isn't about the kids. This is a member of my public. It's, guests on
Teachers,
property.
right, no concealed
Whether,
carry.
and it's my property. It's if, a Little League team's using my property, it's our property as a district, so you have to conform to our rules. An outside group using ours, this is about the place and anyone on it. So you've got that around kids and punishment in that other policy.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe we really talk about that in the opener a lot more clearly, that this is the nexus of the property versus the person, right? And get that in the opening around, this is about our property and anyone on it, including groups, community, anything like that. So we can clean that up. I like,
Sorry.
I don't like there are 6 exceptions to the rule.
That's where I was going. Go
I
ahead.
don't mind the bullets, I don't mind those general concepts, but when you say there's 6, I'm gonna come up with a 7. When you know what I mean? Like, so keeping that a little bit more, here's some generalized exceptions, I think that's a little bit easier. So I'd like to kind of, I'll do that crosswalk then of the updated language, make sure that everything in our current is in there, and I'll rewrite that opener a smidge and cross-reference around students. And again, make that more clear and lead them there. And then, because the policy number won't change, and if I don't put the text in there, I'm fine. But I'll lead that opener just a little bit more clearly to Chad and John's point around what about for students, what about for community.
Yeah, can you maybe throw in the reference to the policy that applies to
Mhm.
discipline for those actions?
That's fine.
Just as a link there,
Yep.
or accordance to.
I may have missed that in the WASB portion, but in the existing portion, under our 6 exceptions, there's one for number 2, unloaded firearms in a locked vehicle or locked case, separately stored ammunition that's on any part of school grounds, provided however the firearm case or rack is not visible to those passing by in the vehicle. So in theory, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, I just want to be sure that that's allowed. That's what that means today, correct?
That's what the
That's what
current
the
policy and
That's right.
updated language looks like.
Well, that's my,
Mhm.
one way or the other,
Mhm.
in the revised language.
You see that more up north where you're going
Yeah.
hunting, and it just means your stuff is stowed.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but when we go into the new language, we need to make sure either that
It's clear.
it's clear, one way or the other.
Mhm.
Which part are you talking about, 832?
I'm looking at, it's on the scan packet, page 18. Yep.
832, number 2.
Yep, and then you go into the 6 exceptions, what are the revised 6? Number 2.
So the next one is the revised,
Correct.
so that does speak about an exception, it's
Does
the
it?
same thing,
Yep.
number, it's the first bullet point.
Oh, okay, permissions not applied. There it is, sure
So,
enough.
yeah, so we'll do the cross-check where you
Yeah,
can
just make
see
sure.
them. Let's get, I'll
Thank
get
you,
the
John.
updated policy in that method. I'll rewrite that opener. I'll have the cross-reference for student-specific in there. And then I'll do the double-check line by line around every concept being so stated.
Mhm. Yeah, well, that'd be good, because John points out a good one there.
Mhm.
The WASB policy, that language to identify John, which is good stuff,
Mhm.
talks about certain individuals age 21 years or who are licensed to carry a concealed weapon.
Mhm.
And the number 2 doesn't talk about the concealed, but regardless,
Mhm.
it's the same spirit, so we just want to be sure that
Right.
whatever's presented to
Cross-check.
us, we just want to be clear.
Yep,
Because I
so
think that's
again, a little direction tonight, looking at the 2
Yeah.
pieces, and now kind of marry those 2 pieces together and clean up some of the intros in the other.
Mhm.
So good direction, thank you.
okay. 32. Sponsorships and public gifts.
So in that next one, sponsorships and public gifts, it was funny. That is updated, there's no recommended changes, but right behind it is an 841, saying that I would take in donated hazardous materials.
Well, I wouldn't we?
So Dave Ross and I were talking about, we really couldn't see a case for taking in secondhand donated materials, but again, if you want to look at 840, that was updated March 7th, 2022. It's most recent language, there's no recommendations there, it covers both sponsorship and public gifts. So, but again, right behind it is the 841, I would recommend we get rid of that. Dave and I didn't see a need to take in secondhand hazardous materials. I did check in case there was a case I was
Yeah.
missing.
Well, no, I mean, it's left to one's imagination what possibly that could be, but If the idea is, hey, I'm a chemical manufacturer, and wait a minute, you have a chemistry lab and you use hydrochloric acid in your thing, so I'd be glad to donate some hydrochloric acid rather than have you purchase it, I suppose.
I don't want that.
That seems so rare, let's,
We haven't had it, but two, I also don't want things that are being open, you don't know what that is. And if I need it for a class, then we'll make sure our kids have it.
yeah, the flip is, and I think you mentioned in talking with your staff, it sounds like if we got rid of this, we wouldn't suffer.
No,
Okay.
there's been no issue where we've taken in anything, there's been no,
We would save lots of money by taking in hazardous materials. Okay,
right,
interesting.
Yeah, assuming you only take stuff from vetted,
correct.
don't vendors.
And
Take it just
non-hazardous,
from,
yeah.
Tiny shop in Germantown or something.
Exactly, yeah, opened or anything like that. The next one, it's really a throwback. We've got it nestled in where it should be, which is under 850 when you click on it on the website, but the 1324, I found this from 1982, I don't see that it was removed ever, so we've kept it in place of where it should be, which is an 850. You can see right behind it is updated 850 language, which is what that number should be around public solicitations on school premises. It's just that they can't come in and do that. And do those pieces. So what you do want to, and I give it to you in its entirety, but you do want to talk about, there's some cases where a lot of people have them in their office buildings. What's the name of those companies? I don't know, I don't want to promote anyone inadvertently. But in the break room, you'd have like, oh, here's some like as seen on TV, some reads, some stuff like that they come around and offer to your employees. There might be some of those pieces, so, those are generally building level decisions. I'm fine with that still being, but again, you try and keep solicitation outside of that scope, and then you look at when we are soliciting and who's allowed. There is a piece of conflict that we stay away from. Our principals are well versed, the sale of food and beverages through the school meal program. There's almost a no compete on that piece, that we don't go into their cafeteria during their mealtime and sell things. You might have a fundraise sale outside of that, and then Andy Sarno, his office manages, because they request when are they doing fundraisers, when will that be, and you can only have so many conflicts a year, that kind of piece. So just looking at the two pieces and what your, like I said, initial thoughts, so we've got a direction to write this, but.
Does mean we can't have college fairs anymore since they're soliciting college?
That's a good interpretation, they really are.
So remind me, the 850, I'm on page 26 of the scan packet, that's currently in place?
This is called 1324.
Yeah, the one that looks like it was
It's
typewritten.
from
in the
1982
1980s.
and typewritten, yes. I saw no evidence of it being rescinded or not in place,
So
but that is the one
So that one's on the books?
I would consider this on the books.
Okay,
Despite its numbering, despite its age, I would consider that to be on the books. I found no evidence of it being removed.
whereas 8, go ahead, John.
It's essentially a duplicate of 850.
It's the
Or-
concept of it, you're right, it's the
That's-
850, it would align with 850, so it's the concept of soliciting funds, but I'm giving you right behind it the 850, which is the most recent WASB language.
And so that WASB language is not currently on our books?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm bringing it to you for consideration to update our 1982 language.
Yeah,
So removal of 1324
Correct.
and
You-
update with 850.
Yeah, you're right, I would ask for removal to formally sunset that policy, and then ask for this adoption, and we do that together.
yeah, I think that
Maybe
makes,
something that looks the same,
yeah, I think it makes sense.
just a little bit laid out better.
Before we move on, can I, to be respectful of Chris's
Yeah.
pre-requested time to end, can I make a motion that we suspend further discussion of the 800 series until next policy
You
meeting?
don't even need to make a motion, we just
Then I
kind
just-
of
I
look
would
at
just
that.
Yeah, we'll just pick up where we left off.
Yeah, we
Well,
do.
then I would like to do that.
Perfect. John, any objections? We'll pick up next time where we left off here.
Yep.
All right. I appreciate it, and thank you to the group for indulging my need to leave at 5:50 PM, so appreciate it. Thought we had good discussion and covered a lot of grounds, and look forward to the next.
Yes,
So,
and again, I want to see what we could cover this evening, that'll help me create that schedule. I'll put out for times, I would say if we kept a little bit tighter schedule for the next month, we'll be able to clear this and then get to that cycle. So I'll bring that calendar and those other pieces back. We just need a little bit more time to pick up that, so, perfect, I will schedule those, thank you so much.
all right, thank you. Any objections to adjourning then? None? None? We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, thanks for that time, I didn't know anything.
Oh,
I like somebody to do that.
Like it's getting close to
Yeah,
8:50.